All right. All right. I don't know what was going on there. Why it keeps playing. Um, welcome to. I apologize for the confusion there. Welcome to Bigger Truth Media. I am Scott McMahon, and I have Paul Hudson with me today. I am super excited. Paul Hudson is a candidate for U.S. Rep in Western Michigan, in the Kent County and I believe the Ottawa County areas. And I just, if this is your first time in the show, I'm biased, but I really believe that the shows that I've had recently, the guests that I've had, I think that this is one of the most important podcasts in the whole country. And I know that's a big statement, but the work that I've been doing and that other people have been helping me with is just, it's extraordinary. Exposing the operators that are involved in trying to take down the Republican Party from within. And it's a very important story, and only by exposing these people can we really make the party what it's supposed to be about, which is electing Republicans and helping support good candidates. And that's really what the focus of this show is right now. I'm really excited to talk with Paul. I've talked with several people that are in this area that I really trust in Kent County and Ottawa County area. And they all just give me full-throated endorsements of Paul. Said he's by far the most sane candidate in the race, and so part of the and I wrote a story just 2 weeks ago about Kent County and what was happening there, and this was leading up to Trump's visit of President Trump's visit of Grand Rapids. Just what was this, a week and a half ago, and really what led up to that was the issue of border security really hitting home in a really hard and painful way and scary way in Grand Rapids in particular, with the murder of a young woman by an illegal immigrant who had been sent back to Mexico under President Trump and then found his way back in under Biden. And you have there, if you're in the Kent County, Ottawa County area, you have a current representative in Hillary Scholten, who was an immigration attorney, as I understand, and has worked under Obama, and is close with all that, and so she's really helped to create this problem. And it's not just this one incident. Also in Grand Rapids, I reported on another incident where an illegal immigrant was just convicted of first-degree murder just in the last few months. So, and that conviction was just about to happen. I think it happens next. The sentencing is going to be next week. So anyway, so Paul, we're here because we want to hear from you, and I'd really like to know, just if you want to start just with a little bit about your story and why you're running. I know you ran in 22, and just kind of what's led you to get into politics and why you're running in the first place.
Sure. And so, Scott, it's good to be with you, and thanks for having me on today. Something you said there in the intro, I think hits the nail on the head about why I'm running. I do consider myself a pretty sane guy. I consider myself a normal guy. And what's interesting about being in politics is the people you meet in politics are very different from the people you meet in the real world. And I think we all have neighbors, colleagues, friends who we think would be great representatives for us in Congress or president or whatever it is, where they're smart people, they're thoughtful people, and they're common sense, normal people. And I just think we have too few of those people running for office right now. And you mentioned I ran in 22. I ran for the Michigan Supreme Court, so that was my sort of first toe in the water of the political world. But I understand why nobody in their right mind wants to do this right now, right? It's not a comfortable experience. Politics have gotten so crazy that it's chasing the normal people away. And the result is that the people by and large, who are willing to do this are not the people that we want representing us in Washington or Lansing or anywhere else. So that's what drove me to run. We need just good, solid people of good character who truly reflect our communities. The people that you meet when you go to your kids' soccer games and baseball games and everything else. It's not these extreme crazy people that get overrepresented on cable news and everything else. So, happy to be running in this race. I think it's a really important race, but that's the basic of what drove me to run.
Great, great. So let's talk about Hillary Scholten and a little bit more. I'm sure you know a lot more about her background than I do, and border security, in general. And just, I mean, this is obviously a huge issue that appeals to not just. It's important not just to the farther right of the party. I mean, this is something that I think is becoming increasingly important to independents and moderates, even in both parties. Especially when we have people in Grand Rapids. There's a very real and very rational fear for their personal safety right now.
Well, I think you said it right. I mean, I think traditionally people have thought of this as sort of a base red meat kind of an issue. It's a very mainstream common sense issue now. I mean, it's something like 7 in 10 Americans recognize that the border it's a crisis situation. It's a national security crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's not good for everyone, and there are common sense solutions to that. So, and it's an area where my opponent and I have very different views on the world. And you mentioned Hillary Scholten's background as an immigration lawyer and immigration activist. To me, this is a simple common sense issue where we need to secure the border, and we've had something between 7, 8, 9 million illegal crossings in the past few years, and ordinary people, the regular people that I talk to, recognize that this is a serious problem that needs to be solved, and it's been a policy failure, and it has led to some pretty tragic consequences.
So what are the solutions to this problem? I mean, what do you plan to do to help to make this better?
Well, I think the good news is that there are some common sense solutions, and you don't have to go back very far before we had a much more secure border than we have right now. And what led to this sort of open border philosophy.
You're still there, Paul?
Issuing a series of executive orders, essentially declaring that the United States government isn't going to enforce our immigration laws anymore, with predictable results, right? And so the good news is there are things we can do, just a matter of executive authority and enforcing the law again. And then there are things we can do to make the law better in Congress. And a specific example of that, there was a bill last year called H.R. 2, Secure the Border Act. Hillary Scholten voted against that. Was it a perfect bill? Probably not. But, that was almost a full year ago now. And since then, we've had millions more illegal crossings. And so I get frustrated when I see the politicians in Washington sort of pointing fingers and, well, you oppose the Senate bill and you oppose the House bill. I frankly don't really care where it comes from, but get something done. That's sort of the basic breakdown in Congress right now is they can't get anything done, even something that's so obviously a problem that people are demanding solutions.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and it's so hard with the Congress being so divided, and what can Republicans do right now in the House when they know that it's not going to pass the Senate, and if by some miracle it did, certainly Biden wouldn't sign on to it unless it were in his interest.
But the answer to that is that's the way our government works, right? We have different branches of government. We have a bicameral legislature, and it requires people coming together and sometimes swallowing hard. And if there's a provision in a bill that you don't like, but on the balance, this is making things better. It's called being a legislator. It's called being an adult, really. You have to be able to take your incremental wins when you can. And this sort of total dysfunction in Congress is why the everyday American has lost complete faith in Congress. They have an 11% approval rating right now. That means you can't get 89% of Americans to agree on anything. They all agree that Congress is just a disaster right now.
Yes, that is true. Heather Dow says, you're running in my district. The crime has increased exponentially in the past year. I live blocks from where Ruby Garcia was murdered. And, this is just, it is a very human issue. And, it's absolutely tragic what has happened to Ruby Garcia, what happened to Ruby Garcia and her family. It's this is something that really affects families, and I think especially mothers, but really anyone who is concerned about the safety of their family. It's terrifying. So
it's a tragic situation, and like you said, it's a very human situation, and so I think I have a responsibility as a candidate to be measured and respectful in the response to this. I don't see it as my role to sort of whip up the passions about this, but I think what this episode does is highlight the policy failures, right? And it's always going to be specific instances like this, unfortunately, that maybe help people wake up to the fact that there really is a problem. And it was caused by a policy failure in our immigration system going back many years, right? I mean, this was someone here illegally who had a long criminal record, multiple encounters with the police, then was ultimately deported in 2020 and came back again. And we're not quite sure when that is, but the point is that's a series of policy failures that shouldn't be acceptable to anybody, to any thinking person. And so to me, let's focus on that, and let's at least learn something from this incident and many others that are like it, to recognize that this is a real problem that we need Washington to solve yesterday, right? But it needs to happen now.
Right. Yeah. And so much of it too is just, we need a president who will actually enforce the laws that we've got on this. So let's move on to another major issue is the national debt. And, this is another one of those issues that I think appeals to people, not just, this isn't a far right issue. I think everybody knows, in terms of personal finance, if we manage the government the way we're managing our personal finances, we'd be in a lot of trouble. I'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions on just the national debt. And, it seems to be spiraling out of control. What can we do about this?
It's spiraling out of control. We have a $34 trillion national debt. I mean, sometimes these numbers can be so big that you lose track of what that means, but it means that every man, woman, and child in America has $100,000 of debt hanging over their head that maybe they didn't know about. And we've treated this like monopoly money for so long. Now we're starting to see the real consequences of that. One is that we're now paying more in interest on the debt, just the interest on the debt, than our entire national defense budget, to give you some perspective of that. It's unsustainable, and it's ballooned from 5 trillion just 20 years ago to now 34 trillion, and we're adding a trillion every 100 days. I mean, it's getting crazy, and tied to that is the inflation that we're all feeling. And if there's one issue that is top of mind for everybody in the district, we can all feel that everything's out of whack right now. And the reason is because, a cart of groceries, $100 cart of groceries from 3 years ago is now $140, right? And you can't fool people about that. And it's a real problem. It's making everyday life unaffordable, but it's tied to this sort of free money, $1 trillion spending package after $1 trillion spending package that we've dumped into the economy that has turbocharged inflation, and there are real effects to that. So that's again another just philosophical disagreement that I have with Hillary Scholten, and it's why these elections really do matter.
Mm-hmm. There is no easy problem. One thing that Republicans understand is that all debts must be paid. I mean, this is just a fundamental truth. And Democrats don't believe that. They believe in modern monetary theory, which says that somehow magically, if you spend more, that you actually have more. And if you inflate the debt, then it's actually better for the economy, which is it's absurd. But um, you know,
Yeah,
it's yeah.
and we're playing a dangerous game. I mean, we're building a debt bomb, and it long term is not sustainable. And let me be clear. I mean, both parties are at fault for this, but it is something. This is a big ship, and step one has to be sort of throttling this thing back, getting spending under control, and that starts with Congress. Congress controls the purse strings of the federal government. So it certainly matters the approach, the philosophical approach that we have in our representatives.
Yeah. So Kay has a good question here. Just, what specifically would you cut from government spending? Like get a little bit, into the weeds as far as how do we make these hard decisions? Where do they start specifically?
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, step one is throttling back, and there have been common sense, very modest proposals. One example from last year is the Limit, Save, Grow Act in Congress, and it just set caps on discretionary spending at 2019 levels, I believe. Modest proposal, but that's the sort of thing that we need to start doing to to settle things down before we can start making bigger improvements. But we need to take those incremental gains when we can. Ultimately, we probably need to move towards something like a balance. We need structural reforms in how we pass budgets, right? I mean, the 2024 budget was just passed, right? And we're well into 2024. This thing was supposed to be passed, 6 months ago or so, and Congress just isn't doing its basic job of getting into the budgetary process. And so then we run up against these government shutdowns after government shutdowns. Ultimately, we probably need structural reforms, like, whether it's balanced budget amendments, whether it's sort of, chaining our congressmen to their desks in DC until they get the job done. There are things we need to do, and need to start that process now.
Yeah. And ultimately, we're not, when we vote for a U.S. rep, we're not voting for a king. We're voting for one member out of a body of over 400 members. And so, what we should be looking for as voters is who can help to move things in the better direction. Now, this is when we're talking about cutting government spending, we're talking about every decision that you make is one that's going to hurt someone. And so it's a very difficult thing for a politician to do, and that's part of the reason why we're in this mess.
And here's a good example of that. So the Biden administration released their 2025 budget, $7.3 trillion, right? And so it's a huge number. It sort of spends lavishly in almost every area. Budgeting is all about priorities, and one thing that jumped out to me is we're sort of skimping on our national defense budget. Various agencies are getting, 5, 7, 8% hikes in their budgets, and meanwhile our defense budget is shrinking. To me, that's sort of backward, right? I mean, number one obligation of the government is to protect the citizens. So we start with our defense budget, and then we move down to lower priorities. And I think right now we have our priorities out of whack.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when it is a matter of, are your priorities, just as a voter, are your priorities closer to my priorities, or the priorities that I want representing me? And I think, while you're not in my district personally, I think that the priorities that you're talking about clearly are more aligned, I think, with most Americans I think anybody that understands, that there's a problem with inflation, there's a problem with, and that's linked directly to the national debt, because the only way to pay off that debt is either through inflation or by raising taxes and cutting spending. Either way sucks for everybody. So it's hard. And so, is this something that are you willing to commit to the voters that you're willing to make these kinds of hard decisions. It sounds
Yeah.
like you are.
Yeah, I mean, there's pain coming, right? And it is making those hard decisions. And like I said, I mean, sometimes you're not going to get everything you want in there. But I think that's what we've gotten away from in recent years, is just this sort of all or nothing mentality. And if you don't get everything you want in every bill, then you gotta vote no. I believe you got to take your wins. And you have to realize that you're working within, it's the most brilliant form of government ever devised by man, but it requires, it's a separation of powers for a reason. It's hard to pass a law. It has to run the gauntlet through the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then ultimately signed by the president and upheld in the courts, right? So it's hard by design, but that can't be an excuse to get nothing done when when you have big priorities and you need to get things done.
That's right. I think, and that understanding of, well, government should be slow, it should be hard, and we have to engage in that work of actually seeking compromise. And one of the mind viruses that I think has affected many on the right is this idea that we don't need to compromise, and that compromise is actually part of the problem and the reason why we're in this mess. And that's just a lie. That's just not true. So
Well, just quickly on that. I mean, that's exactly right, and it's not a dirty word. I mean, there's this people are praying for the trifecta, right, where everything lines up for you, where you got the House, got the Senate, got the presidency, and then you cram through everything you can, and then you take the rest of the decade off. I mean, that's not how our government is supposed to work. We're going to have divided government most of the time, and we have throughout our history, and we will for the rest of our history. And we need to be able to get things done in those times too.
Are you okay? I know we're running short on your time limit. Can we do one more question from?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, great.
Keep it rolling.
And this is a good one. Where do you stand on funding foreign wars?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a hot topic, and I understand the different perspectives on this one. Here's where I am. Nobody likes funding foreign wars, right? The problem is that it's still a dangerous world out there, and we're seeing that with the rise of China, them aggressively building up their military, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with the terrorist attack on Israel. Whether we like it or not, dangerous things are happening throughout the world, and the winning playbook for the United States since World War II has been peace through strength. And if there's one universal language on the world stage, it is that if people sense weakness, that's when they'll act, and that's when they will, engage in aggression. And sort of standing up to that at the earliest point is usually the right approach. And so to avoid these conflicts spiraling into wider conflicts that we get drawn into, it is often in our direct national security interest to nip these things in the bud before they spiral wider. So I know that's a sort of a general answer to it, but I would rather see the United States. We're the world superpower. I believe we're still the greatest country on earth. I reject all this talk of us being a nation in decline. But what I do see is our leaders in Washington not acting like it, and we need to start acting like it again.
Yeah. So what does that mean specifically when it comes to, for example, Ukraine, and what would be, if you were there right now, what would be your approach and priorities?
No, so I mean, not a blank check. And I think one thing that the administration has not done a good job of is sort of messaging why this is important to people. But I do think, I mean, Putin has told us what he's going to do. I mean, he wants to restore the Russian Empire. He wants to restore the Soviet bloc, and he's not going to stop until someone stops him. And so, is that good for the United States when we have a rising China to also have a rising territorially aggressive Russia? It's not. And so I think that providing uh, weapons and munitions assistance to Ukraine is in our direct national security interest. I understand that's not the most popular view, certainly in the base of the party right now. But between two bad choices, right? Nobody wants to be involved in this, but the alternative to me is worse, because it is Putin on the march until somebody stops him, and it gets to be an even broader conflict than we have right now.
Right. Right. So yeah, I think I this is something that my personal opinion might be a little bit different on that, but I also think I think often too. Ronald Reagan, and he said, my 80%, the person with whom I agree 80% of the time is my friend and my ally. And I think that I also believe that you are a candidate that can speak to most of the voters in Michigan now are independents. And so, I think you're looking to build a broad coalition, and I would, that's something that I think is important. So I really appreciate you coming on, and this has been a great conversation, and I'd love to see how things continue with you, and we'll certainly be in touch. Do you have any parting thoughts?
Well, just one thing you said there at the end, I think is tremendously important. We're allowed to disagree on issues, right?
Yeah.
And I respect people's opinions that differ with mine. That's part of the give and take of politics. And there's been a harmful trend over the past several years, I think, of sort of, rooting out any dissent within a party when, we need to be sharing different ideas and disagreeing respectfully where we can. And I'll explain where I'm coming from. You explain where you're coming from. Maybe I'm wrong, right? And maybe I rethink the issues as well. But
Sure.
that's a healthy conversation, and we need more of it, not less. So
Right.
really appreciate it. I've enjoyed the conversation, and would love to come back on as this race progresses.
Great. Yeah, I think along those lines, would you? This is an interesting statement from Silver Fox. Is that something that you think you'd agree with?
Yeah, well, I think the reality of our government, I agree with the sentiment. We need to secure our borders now and yesterday. The United States government is fully capable of doing more than one thing simultaneously. And in fact, if we don't, shame on us. So I think both things need to happen. But I understand. I mean, there's a reason that border security is the top issue for so many people right now. So I agree. Secure the border now.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you all for your questions and your comments. This was definitely, I think, an important thing to think about. And as we get to know you and the other candidates in the race, and I hope this is, really valuable for all of us. So thanks again. And until next time.